Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple of questions through you to the proponent of the bill.
Representative Miller, prepare yourself. Representative France has some questions. Representative France.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Section 1, just for clarification, for the October 1st, 2016 date that is in that section, that is the date with the foundation was poured, not when the CO was obtained. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Miller.
Yes, through you, Mr. Speaker. The inquirer is correct. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Thank you for that answer, for clarification. The question I had then, if, say that the CO is being obtained, say January of 2017, and the foundation was poured a year before, which would be predating this particular time, and as we've already heard, there is generally no record of who actually poured the foundation. How would the owner or the applicant of the CO be able to document the date of when that foundation was poured? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Miller.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, if that is the case, then unfortunately this homeowner would be in a similar situation to others among the 213 who have come forward up to this point with complaints that are similarly of this nature. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, the question then, what is the applicant to do if he cannot validate when the foundation was poured, and if we now have a statute that says you cannot get a CO, a certificate of occupancy, without that certification? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Miller.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, you've gotten your certificate of occupancy, and so if you can't find the records of who may have poured this several months earlier, that homeowner would just be in the same situation as some of the current people who have experienced this problem. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Maybe I didn't make myself clear. I'll repeat the question. The example I'm giving is we're applying for a certificate of occupancy in January 2017, so 4 months after the effective date of that paragraph. The foundation is poured sometime before that, and the documentation is not available. So we're applying for a certificate of occupancy, and the statute now says I have to be able to validate when that foundation was poured. If I have no validation of when it was poured, how is the inspector supposed to give a certificate of occupancy when now they're expecting to know when that foundation was poured to document that it was predating October 1st? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Miller.
Yes, through you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, because this problem has garnered a lot of publicity over the last half year or more, hopefully any building and pouring of concrete that has been done in recent times, hopefully you'd think that the homeowner would be astute enough to try to validate and receive documentation that would give them this information. And hopefully it's not the same as someone who might have had a foundation from 40 years ago and they're the third or more consecutive homeowner who's lived there, and it may have been lost with the previous homeowners. But hopefully that's not the case with something poured so recently, especially with the publicity that this issue has garnered in recent times. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate that answer, and I agree that most homeowners and most people having a new construction would be attentive to that, certainly with the press that's been had on that to document it. One thing that I would suggest and commend the good chair to consider is something Representative Ackert brought up, is the permit. If we required, as of October 1st, 2016, that the poured concrete would be documented on the permit, then it would be clear that the foundation was poured prior to that if it's not on the permit. If that mandate was there, then there would be proof on the permit, and you would have documentation. So I would suggest to the chair if he would consider to amend Section 1 to a requirement to have that information documented on the permit. Therefore, the applicant is not on the hook. It is actually done as part of the regular building process with the town building official engaged in that process as well. So through you, Mr. Speaker, that would be my recommendation. Thank you very much.